Welcome back to Reading Bear. Today, we will take a look at some new malicious compliance stories. And if you enjoyed my content, please don't forget to subscribe to my channel and post some bear emojis in the comments. Let's go!
First one is titled, Sometimes You Can't See the Forest for the Trees. Back when I was a much younger man, I worked as a project manager for a small company. The owner's name was Vince. Now Vince wasn't a truly horrible man, but he was exceptionally hypocritical. He'd tout the virtues of charity but was cheap. He'd readily give the impression that he was morally superior because he was a true believer, but then he was the ones who was charging the adult movies to his room on road trips. You get the type. He wasn't truly horrible, but he was more than a bit of an a-hole. Our story starts off with a couple of missed appointments by Tom, our salesperson, and Vince's friend. While everyone else was held to Vince's, supposedly, moral standards, Tom could get away with anything and Vince wouldn't do anything about it. How he conned Vince into giving him a job remains a mystery to this day, but Tom would show up to the office inebriated if he showed up at all. Tom's drinking got worse and he stood up our biggest client, my client, as I was the PM on more than half of their jobs, twice in a row, and the client was furious. So Vince put out a memo that no one could miss a meeting with this client with no exceptions. One day I'm under the weather more than just a bit. I call in on leave and ask Vince to call the client to reschedule. He starts yelling on the phone that I have to make the appointment because there are no exceptions, going so far as to tell me that if I don't make the appointment then perhaps I wouldn't have a job when I return to the office. Yeah, those morals are pretty flexible, eh Vince? So I drag my butt to the meeting, but I'm pretty furious at this already. A couple of weeks later it's Christmas time. We all look forward to it because our meager and under-market salaries are bumped with our annual profit-sharing bonus. So Vince gets up to give his speech, which we don't care about, and then we should get our checks. Except he starts saying that he's using some of the profit sharing for employee initiatives to make our lives better in the office. For example, he's buying company cars so we don't have to take our vehicles to client locations. There goes our mileage reimbursement, including one for himself. Of course his was a Mercedes and the rest were Ford Taurus cheap models. And he announces that he's hired a plant service to green up our office to improve our working conditions. Because of these employee benefits, our profit-sharing bonus was about half what we should have received. You have got to be kidding me. The cars were bad enough, but the plants really became the object of our resentment. Now normally when you green up an office you ask them to bring in a few plants. But no, because this was essentially on our dime, Vince didn't care what it cost. So they brought in more office greenery than I've ever seen before or since. Every office had some sort of indoor tree or potted plant. You could hardly get to the office copier as it was flanked by 2 trees. 1/3 road of the break room was covered in foliage. Now people really started to grumble and Vince heard those grumblings. He took it personally that his generosity was being questioned. So he sent out a memo to everyone that anyone who was unhappy with this could bring their office plant to his office and they would have a discussion about it. The inference was clear: complain and you might lose your job because he spent your money on something he wanted. I'd had enough and frankly I didn't care anymore. So I showed up very early the next morning and spent over an hour carrying every office ficus and fern into Vince's corner office. I put the plants on his shelves, desk, chair and bookcase. I covered every square inch of the floor with potted trees. I even hung a couple from the drop ceiling. When I say the office was packed, believe me, it was all I could do to get the door closed. But before I closed the door I left a 1-sentence memo on Vince's desk. Getting out of the room was really quite difficult. Covered in sweat and just a bit of potting soil, I sat down at my desk and waited. Vince showed up a half hour later and I heard a yell. Vince started yelling so much the fat little weeble was shaking all over. He stormed into my office and angrily asked me if I did it. I told him that I had and that I was complying with his memo. I wasn't happy with the plants that my profit sharing had purchased and brought them to his office as directed. He turned redder and redder as he huffed and sputtered. Finally he ordered me to remove the plants from his office. Sorry Vince, I can't do that, I replied. I had to go attend a meeting with the big client and there are no exceptions to missing it. And then I left. Since everyone else had scattered when they saw what was happening, Vince had to remove the plants from his office by himself. It must have about killed him. When he finally got to his desk, the memo was the only paper on it. On it there was only one line. Sometimes you can't see the forest for the trees. Malicious compliance 2 times, once for the plants and the other for the meeting. Win, win, baby. Epilogue, Part 1. When I returned to the office, of course I had to. Vince was waiting for me. He called me into his now cleared office demanding an explanation. I sat down and told him my perspective about how he took money from my pocket to benefit himself. I told him his actions were Christian, just to hammer it home, and he damaged his relationship with every employee at the company. I told him the memo explained all of that. He was so caught up with his way or the highway that he had utterly failed in his obligations to his employees. He didn't like that much. He threatened to fire me, so I calmly mentioned that if he fired me for complying with his memos, I would be eligible for unemployment and perhaps even legal recourse. Finally, I mentioned that I also happened to be the main contact for his largest client and they wouldn't be too happy with removing me from their projects. He was stuck with me and he knew it. Then I got up and walked out of his office while Vince's mouth stood agape. Epilogue, Part 2. Oh yeah, about that meeting with the large client. That meeting was a job interview. I knew it went well and I received the formal offer a couple of days later. I was now the lead of the project that I was working on. So I turned in my 2 weeks' notice, went to work for my client, and one of my first actions was to let Vince know that he was now working for me. Oh, the irony. Epilogue, Part 3. I wish I could say this all had a happier ending, but ultimately it didn't. The large client I went to work for sold out a couple of years later and I was caught in a round of layoffs and consolidations. That was the beginning of a bad time in that industry, and I got laid off a couple more times in the next 3 years before finally switching careers altogether to what I do now, which makes me a comfortable living. Vince's business was damaged but not destroyed, and he survived for another decade and a half before selling it off, but he made out all right in the end. I didn't fire his firm. I really needed those services, but I was probably a bit more of an a-hole than I needed to be. Vince did get the message, giving his employees a mid-year bonus that essentially restored their profit-sharing percentage. And we did patch up our relationship a couple of years later at an industry conference, to the point we joked about it a bit. Or at least he pretended to, since I was now part of his largest client. Next one is titled, Everyone Has to Pay for an Emergency Locksmith? Okay, that includes you, Mr. Boss. I used to work as a property manager for a semi-large company in a small city. Among the usual duties of a PM, we were also responsible for after-hours maintenance calls. Originally, we were paid for 3 hours of overtime to cover the phone calls we answer and paid an additional $80 for any call-outs we have to attend ourselves. The entire team rotated the phone between us, so we only had the emergency phone for one weekend every 2 months. The phone was an after-hours maintenance line for over 800 properties, so you can imagine how busy it would get, but the extra pay helped the blow of losing your weekend. This was not a problem until our boss wanted to crack down on overtime hours, stating, "I very much doubt you are working 3 hours whilst you have the emergency phone." His new rule was for each staff member to document when and who called, and you would be paid an hour of regular time each call. But under no circumstances are you to attend any issues yourself. This includes unlocking doors for tenants who are locked out of their property. He enforced that the tenant must pay for a locksmith to attend and let themselves in. This angered many of our clients and caused us to be constantly abused over the phone by our tenants, as they had to pay $300 for a locksmith. This is where the malicious compliance began. We indeed documented all our calls, which instead of paying each employee $100 for 3 hours, he ended up having to pay us $500 or more each weekend due to the number of calls we would actually take. But it doesn't stop there. What I should probably mention is that our company can provide accommodation for our hire staff at a fraction of the cost you would normally pay. The manager in question was in such accommodation, and lo and behold, he managed to lock himself out of his apartment at 11 p.m. on a Friday night. Manager: Hello op. I have locked myself out of my apartment. You need to collect the spare keys and come unlock my door op. I am very sorry, manager, but I cannot do that. Manager, excuse me? Why not? Op, unfortunately you have instructed me not to attend any call-outs under any circumstance. I can, however, send you through the number of our preferred locksmith to come let you in? After a few choice words, the manager hung up and phoned a locksmith. Let's just say, after he had to fork out $300 for an after-hours locksmith, he changed our ability to attend call-outs. Next one is titled, Workplace Gets Robbed of Thousands of Pounds of Stock After New Boss Tells Me I'm Not the Supervisor and I Must Comply with My Contract. Bit of a background to this. So, around 10 years ago I worked for a small, independent construction supplies store. We sold various things, from measuring tapes to power drills, plumbing fittings to sheet timber and paint to roof tiles. I had been there for 3 years by this point and got on well with the whole team. There were around 12 employees in total and everyone helped everyone. The atmosphere was always happy and cheerful. The boss, let's call him Jeff, was a star. I loved him. He was laid back as hell and we had a lot of mutual interests, sports teams, bands, movies, etc. He would bring in stacks of donuts every Friday for the team. Jeff was just the best boss ever. We had this supervisor, Len, who had been with the company a good while. Len would come in early and open up in the morning before anyone else arrived and would stay back at night to lock up and close the gates. When Len left the company to move to his wife's home country about 2 years into my being there, I agreed with Jeff that I would take over from Len with regards to opening in the morning and closing at night. The verbal agreement with Jeff and HR, payroll, was that I was not promoted as supervisor. I was happy with that as I didn't want the extra hassle, plus the super had to work every third Saturday, where I didn't. Jeff took on the extra duties that went with the role, but I was to be paid an extra 2 hours per day for the added duties in the morning and at night. Things were normal for a good while, until Jeff went on long-term sick leave. He was a huge loss in and around the place and, naturally, we were all worried about him. I visited him regularly while he was absent and kept him up to date with the goings-on and gossip. In the meantime, the firm hired a temporary replacement manager, Rick the Prick, to fill in for Jeff. This guy was a complete buttock. Of the highest order. No one liked him. He was smug and arrogant. He would say crude things to the females and had this top dog, tough guy attitude. Mess with me at your peril kind of guy. It was to the point where the donuts on a Friday were ordered to be stopped. Signs up the lot. With the extra OT money, I had taken over the buying of the Friday donuts so as to keep morale high. But no, it had to stop. Soon enough, Rick was assessing the timesheets and noticed my daily 2 hours overtime claim. He called me in to speak about it and I informed him that as per the agreement with Jeff and HR, payroll. He asked if I had it in writing and I said no, it was a verbal agreement that people from HRP would back me up on. Rick was his typical arrogant, smart bastard self and told me, I don't give a duck what you have agreed, it ain't in writing so you ain't getting the ducking OT. I know it doesn't take 2 hours per day to lock and unlock a ducking door or two. I have good reason to write you up for falsifying timesheets for this. It stops now. You work your stated hours and you do only the stated duties as per your contract. Thing is, the silly bastard confirmed what he said to me by way of an email just so I had it in writing so I was perfectly clear as to what my place in the company was. Fine by me, Rick. That evening I hung the shop keys in the key cabinet and went to wash up. I wasn't the last out but I left at 5:05 p.m. instead of my usual 5:45 or thereabouts. I walked out while all the lights were left on, the doors were unlocked and the gates were left open. Even the roller shutter door in the warehouse was left half open. The next morning I arrived little after 7:15 instead of my usual 6:30. Some colleagues had already turned up by this point. The place had been done over good style. All the power tools were gone. Loads of wood stock gone. Pipes all gone. Paint all gone. It had been ransacked good and proper. An estimated £30,000 to £40,000 of stock was gone and as the store was now a crime scene, we were all sent home until further notice. We all had to give statements to the police and a few days later I was called into a meeting with HR and Rick the Prick. I was well aware of what was coming and was well prepared. He went to town on me. He accused me of being in on it as I was the only keyholder. I wasn't, and that I was facing years in prison. I sat in silence as he fired me 6 times in that meeting. Dereliction of duties. Breach of a verbal contract, apparently that's a thing, the lot. He was coming after me like wildfire because I had failed to ensure that the building was secured, as was the ongoing agreement put in place by me previous boss. After what seemed like forever having this irate lunatic scream at me, I asked HR if I could log into my emails on her computer. Surprisingly, Sarah agreed. Imagine the absolute poo-eating grin as I pulled up the 3-day-old email from Rick reminding me of our conversation and confirming that I was to stick to the duties and times as stated in my contract, and smugly and innocently told Sarah, I just did what my boss told me to do. And the best part was the sheer horror on Rick's face when I pulled out 5 printouts of that email and handed them to him and said, I have more of these at home just in case you feel like destroying these ones and removing emails from the system. Now, is there anything else? Can I get back to work or am I still fired? Rick resigned that day. Next one is titled, Navy Corpsman vs. New Nurse. 1990, I am a relatively new corpsman medic assigned to a surgery ward at the Naval Hospital. Our patients are all post-op and there are 60 beds. There are 6 or so corpsmen assigned to take care of these patients. As part of our duties, we are to chart our findings and observations as we make our rounds. This surgery ward is usually a first assignment for corpsmen and nurses coming fresh from school. I joined the Navy at 21, so am a little more world-wise than my peers who are all 18 or 19. I know, especially in the military, there is the book way of doing things and the effective way of doing things. We had volumes of manuals that covered every aspect of our jobs and duties that you could imagine. Cue the new nurse who has been assigned and wants to show how good she is at managing the lowly corpsman troops. She was merciless, always looking for opportunities to embarrass or cause trouble for us. One evening I observed her shouting at one of the corpsmen for using an unapproved abbreviation in a patient's chart. What was the offensive abbreviation? ASAP. He had written that the patient needed an evaluation ASAP. You would have thought that he had personally offended her honor. I went and looked in the approved abbreviations section of our operations manual to confirm that it was not there. It was not. I did find that there was a very extensive list of approved abbreviations available to use though. Cue the MC. I pulled all of the corpsmen on the shift and told them to bring their charts to the break room. We then charted all of the notes together using nothing but approved abbreviations. The notes looked like another language. I made sure everyone could read their own notes and sent them out to put the charts back. Nurse, pain in the butt, came in to review the notes with the corpsmen. I take the first round. This is done while standing at the bedside of the patients. She opens the chart, looks at the note and says, Nurse, what is this? Me, I do not understand. What do you mean? Nurse, I do not understand anything you have written. Me, it says that the patient is recovering well with little difficulty but will need further evaluation based on his comments and visible demonstration of discomfort and reduced mobility in his left upper limb. Nurse, that is not what it says. Me, ma'am, I assure you that it does and that those are all approved abbreviations. I am sorry that you do not know them. I do realize that you are new. I smile. She does not. This is the first of 60 charts she is to review. I have never seen corpsmen so eager to review chart notes. We did go get the manual for her, just to be helpful. Last one is titled, You Don't Want Me to Organize Our Documents? Cool, I won't do it then. This is something I remembered about my previous job and I want to share it. I used to work as a legal assistant in a big electric energy company. They're owners of a lot of wind energy plants here in my country, and to say that they're a strong competitor in this market is an understatement, at best. We initially used Microsoft SharePoint as a server for all of our functional systems and to save all of our documents, but the CEO decided to change it to the Box system. The difference between them was so huge that it was shocking. I was usually in charge of saving all of our documents and data in the system, so when the change was announced, I expected orders coming from the legal counselor, the final boss of my department, obviously, to give me that direct order. During a team call via Teams, she started to talk about box and how we must organize our stuff. Since a big part of them were the company's contracts, we needed everything in check. As ridiculous as this sounds, the legal department wasn't liked by, at least, 5 other departments. And truth be told, our document server was a mess. Each person had their own way to save stuff and nothing made sense. Even the legal counselor said it herself, our server looked like some kid's room when they have a lot of fun and don't tidy up on the next second. Of course, this was extremely bad. As she mentioned the organization of the system, I immediately proposed to be the one to create a routine for us to save stuff, such as the archive naming, folder distribution, etc. The paralegal, she was great, also offered to help me, since the workload was immense. We practically would start from scratch and do our best without a basis. My direct boss, one of the legal analysts, immediately interrupted us and said she was going to do it. I told her she wouldn't have enough time, since she's mostly busy analyzing contracts and other incidents. She said for me not to worry because I also had a truckload of things to do and that I wouldn't do a great job anyway. Really? Fine, I won't do it then. Fast forward to a month, we were entering the archive transferring phase of the project. Every single department in the company must have their server organized, because they would do a direct transfer without any sort of checking. Guess what? Our server was still a freaking mess. And to top it all off, the VP came towards the legal counselor and ordered her to have everything organized in 48H. Yes, 48H to organize a completely complicated and messy server. In an emergency team call, she questioned my boss why nothing has been done regarding the server. My boss, trying to keep her own slate clean, threw me under the bus, saying that she shifted the responsibility to me. Luckily, the paralegal backed me up and saved me. She reminded us of the call where my boss strictly told me to not do anything, since I wouldn't do a good job. Despite the hassle, the counselor told me to stop everything I was previously doing and just organize our system. And so I did. I cleaned up the server in the allotted time, had to reorganize everything on my own, didn't eat, sleep, just to make sure everything was in check. When the day came, the VP checked on us again and saw what I did. She said for the counselor to not let things go out this way again and that I had done a miracle and a half for my department. Boy, what a day. Thanks for listening.